This is Trump's terrorism. This is the Kent state of our time. A peaceful, unarmed protester murdered by Trump's ICE, while Trump's lie factory and Trump personally smeared her, blamed her, made up a story of threat where there was no threat, altered images, lied about her, lied about what the Gestapo did. The Gestapo they sent to kill Americans in American cities in order to make videos to feed the sadistic, bloodlusting psychotics who support Trump. And if you support this, if you support Trump, if you countenance this on our streets against citizens or non-citizens or police or anybody, you are a sadistic, bloodlusting psychotic. That is Donald Trump's base. 2 weeks from Saturday, it will have been 10 years since he said it. 10 years. January 24th, 2016. I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose voters. And once again, his stochastic, terrorist, murderous wish has come true. Only it was not on Fifth Avenue. It was on East 34th Street in Minneapolis. One of his Border Patrol ICE militia gang shot and killed Renee Macklin Good.
Get the fuck out of our neighborhood.
ICE and Border Patrol, and by proxy, Trump killed her, and then they slandered her.
What the fuck? Dude, what the fuck?
Dude, you did a murder for what?
A poet. She was a poet. A prize-winning poet from Old Dominion University. We are lucky her passengers survived the crash that followed the ICE shooting. Trump and Kristi Noem and Homan and the rest of these worthless scumbags had Renee Good shot and killed because militia members, Trump Gestapo, claimed she was trying to run over one of their thugs. Multiple videos show without a shadow of a doubt this is not true. Those who now say this, having seen the video, are lying. As a car which was not even blocking the street moves out of the way of an ICE vehicle, a Trump terrorist exits his car, approaches the victim's car from the back and the side, while another runs in front of her car, pivots around it, and Renee Good is then shot 3 times in the face. The agents, the scum, are never in any danger. The car does not touch any of them. The murderer was parading up and down the Minneapolis street moments later, gloating. The murderer, of whom Trump had just written, quote, based on the attached clip, it is hard to believe he is alive, but is now recovering in the hospital. Unquote. If it is hard to believe the shooter is alive, it is because even under these conditions, and this fascist provocation, and this madness, this unsustainable madness that is the presidency of this psychopath Trump, even against all that, the citizens of that neighborhood had the common sense and some kind of baseline respect for human life to not respond to those who had just committed murder in broad daylight on their streets. Understandably getting less attention, but just as dangerous, hours later, this fascist gang sent by Trump attacked a Minneapolis high school. I will quote Minnesota Public Radio. An official from Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis told NPR News that armed U.S. Border Patrol officers came onto school property during dismissal Wednesday and began tackling people. They handcuffed 2 staff members and released chemical weapons on bystanders. The guy, I'm telling him, like, please step off school grounds, and this dude comes up and bumps into me and then tells me that I pushed him and he's trying to push me and he knocked me down, said a school official who spoke to NPR News on condition of anonymity unquote. Human garbage in masks, given weapons, terrorists, murderers, Trumpists. And if you think this next detail is coincidental, please reconsider your naivete. Trump chose the evening of the day of his crime by proxy in Minneapolis after the murder there to insist that he has, quote, determined that the military budget for this country for the year 2027 needs to be increased from the already obscene level of $1 trillion. Your money and mine, it needs to be increased by 50% to $1.5 trillion. That is the military he wants to use against American civilians on American streets. That is the military he just used against American civilians on American streets in Minneapolis. 34th and Portland. $1.5 trillion to kill you. The Department of Homeland Security's liar-in-chief, the nation's foremost Botox experiment subject already in progress, Kristi Noem, a cheap cowboy hat pulled down over her face to protect it from melting, said, quote, it was an act of domestic terrorism. If she had stopped there, she would have been telling the truth. She did not stop there. Quote, ICE officers got stuck in the snow. They were attempting to push out their vehicle, and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over, unquote, none of which was true. An additional ICE statement, unsigned, claimed its militia members were actually run over. There is no evidence that that is true. A further statement by the ICE spokesperson, an idiot named Tricia McLaughlin, added, quote, one of these violent rioters, there was no riot, weaponized her vehicle, that did not happen, attempting to run over our law enforcement officers, they're street thugs, in an attempt to kill them, an act of domestic terrorism. Once again, only the final 5 words are even vaguely correct and not in the way this idiot meant them. It was an act of domestic terrorism. There was no ICE vehicle stuck. There was no ICE vehicle struck. There was no attempt to push any vehicle out of snow. There was a path on the street so clear that at least 1.5 vehicles wide, and it was not only free of snow, it was dry. There was no attack by any civilian. There was no attempt to run anybody over. There was no weaponization of a vehicle. At best, this blithering idiot Homeland Security Director Noem, the dog murderer, is completely uninformed and must resign or be impeached and prosecuted. At worst, she is not being honest and must resign or be impeached and prosecuted. This spokesperson, McLaughlin, is at best completely uninformed and therefore must resign, and at worst, she is not being honest and must resign. As Governor Tim Walz, himself targeted metaphorically by Trump, thus far only metaphorically, as Governor Walz issued a warning order to his Minnesota National Guard units, as he put it, a standby to a possible activation of the Guard to protect Minnesota from what is now unquestionably, if there were any remaining doubt, what is now unquestionably a rogue government without any moral authority to rule this country. A rogue government whose leaders must be prosecuted for this woman's murder, whether in the next year or in 2029 or in 2049, while Governor Walz suppressed his righteous rage at the fascist government of the United States in a way I cannot summon, as he managed to control himself with far greater provocation than I have received about the terrorist government of Donald Trump. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey suppressed nothing.
I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the fuck out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite. People are being hurt. Families are being ripped apart. long-term Minneapolis residents that have contributed so greatly to our city, to our culture, to our economy are being terrorized, and now somebody is dead. That's on you. And it's also on you to leave.
Mayor Frey speaks for every sane citizen of this country today. And what he says should apply to every street corner in this country, because what happened at 34th and Portland in Minneapolis yesterday can now happen outside your front door tomorrow. ICE, get the F out. Get the F out of Minneapolis. Get the F out of Minnesota. Get the F out of our country. Get out. That day has been coming for these 10 years. We once thought Trump was being metaphorical in some way about shooting someone on Fifth Avenue. In fact, the only thing he did not mean literally in that statement was the idea that he would actually do the shooting. He would never have the courage to do such a thing. In fact, he wanted others to take that risk and that blame for him. He has wanted to shoot protesters on the border. He has wanted to shoot protesters during Black Lives Matter. He has wanted to shoot protesters outside the White House in 2020. He has wanted to shoot protesters during his fascist rallies. He has wanted to shoot protesters during his 2024 campaign. And most infamously and brazenly and tellingly of all, on Fifth Avenue. That was no metaphor. And now, Donald Trump's stochastic dreams have come true. His domestic terrorists, inspired by him, budgeted for by him, with some remove hired by him, have shot and killed an American citizen, an award-winning poet who was peacefully exercising her right, my right, your right to protest. And she was executed by unidentified, masked, bloodthirsty scum. Trump now has his wish. The Trump administration has begun its shooting war, its reign of terror against the peaceful and unarmed citizens of the United States. It can be disputed whether Renee Macklin Good was the first. It cannot be disputed that unless Trump is legally restrained, Renee Macklin Good will not be the last. Okay, back to Trump trying to kill people in and to destroy other countries. Trump's Don Roe doctrine says that as long as another country, let's say Greenland, indicts Trump under its own laws for any crime remotely affecting it, as long as Greenland legally indicts Trump, Greenland is then entitled to send 150 planes to bomb Trump's compound and seize Trump and seize Melania, even if she's at her latest photo shoot, or the plastic surgeons, and rendition the pair of them to Kakartak or Upernavik and put them on trial there. Just so long as they've indicted Trump beforehand. Totally legal. Oh, and just so long as they have made a deal with J.D. Vance beforehand, in which they agree to let him become the new president, providing he swears fealty to Greenland and gives them, our oil. That's all you need, right? That's what Venezuela has taught us and the world, right? All you need is an indictment and a deal with the vice president, and presto, instant coup. Trump is by Felicia. And it's legal. Well, you heard it, Greenland. or China or Russia or Mexico or Canada or Mexico and Canada working together. The Don Roe Doctrine. Exactly what we did in Venezuela and what Trump and Rubio and Hegseth and Lindsey Graham and these other neocons are ready to try in Cuba, Iran, maybe Mexico, definitely Greenland, with Deputy Reichsmarshal Stephen Miller on deck to take over wherever he's needed. It's all legal, at least according to Trump, according to the Don Roe Doctrine. Just get an indictment of Trump from your local neighborhood version of Pam Bondi in Greenland, Mariam Khalilm. It would probably be done out of Mariam's office in the capital of Nuuk. That's downtown Nuuk, where the 20,000 residents actually live, not out in the suburbs, the greater Nuuk metroplex. Ridiculous? Could never happen? That's not the point here. The point here is that Trump just established a legal precedent that would apply in this country if another country decided to remove him. If any country wanted to effect regime change here, have a blast, guys. You do have to get away with it militarily, which I guess is the baseline issue of human existence anyway. But for most of our 250 years, we as a nation had tried to superimpose other values and elements, like right instead of just might. And by Trump's banditry in Venezuela, all that is gone. It's literally just, can you get away with it? Can you catch American defenses with their pants down? I mean, with the Secretary of Brill Cream, Pete Hegseth, got to say the chances are greater than zero. I mean, what is the point of any international law, any system of justice, if you not only say, hey, we can remove your president under our laws, but you basically invite countries even worse than our own to invent worse laws? What if Greenland, no offense, Greenland, but what if Greenland passed a law simply saying it is illegal in Greenland for Donald J. Trump to be president of the United States? Oh, look, there he is being president of the United States. That's illegal here in Greenland. Indict him. The outcome of the raid, pro tip, look for him at a golf course or a McDonald's, or especially a golf course near a McDonald's. The outcome is problematic. But it's like we just decided that you could only do something like that via a treaty of extradition, unless, that is, you do not have a treaty of extradition with the country in question, in which case you say, since we don't have a treaty of extradition, no problem, we're just going to go in there and take the bastard anyway. Tails, you win. Heads, I lose. And also, as I'm giving out pro tips, don't forget to do the deal with J.D. Vance, to obey in advance. And the pro tip here is look for Vance on a couch. By the way, small chance the case against Maduro will be dismissed because of Trump's stupidity and Trump's ego. Small, but again, it is a non-zero chance because the case is in front of a 92-year-old piss and vinegar judge appointed, I believe, by Teddy Roosevelt. And this judge ran out of F's before electricity. Hey. The basis of our rogue state's renditioning of Maduro is you couldn't do that to an actual head of state. But Maduro isn't an actual head of state. He was holding office illegally, even under Venezuelan law. The U.S., in fact, stopped referring to him as president or leader or head of state or El Presidente in 2019, and then Trump effed that up. 2:21 a.m., January 3rd, quote, the United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown, blah, 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 blah. So he calls Maduro president and the leader of Venezuela. So if you're Judge Alvin Hellerstein and you want to throw this case out, boom, swish, turn your sets off there. Oh, and there is also still the chance for the courts to throw the case out because whether he was the president or the janitor in Venezuela, we have laws in this country about seizing, kidnapping, capturing, or renditioning people in other countries and bringing them here. Unless there was a state of war between us and the other country, and as you have heard all week from the tapes of Pete Hegseth from December and August and May, when he said he lived Iraq and Afghanistan and you saw the consequences, and we're not going to try no more nation building, we're not going to change an entire society through military intervention, we've seen that movie before, he said, guess what? We were not at war with Venezuela when we took its leader. Well, that's what Trump called him. Also, part of Trump's accusations for seizing Maduro was that he is the head of, quote, the vicious cartel known as Cartel de los Sols, which flooded our nation with lethal poison. Well, surprise, turns out the Cartel de los Sols doesn't exist. There is no such cartel, no organization, certainly nothing called the Cartel de los Sols, which is literally a colloquial phrase used by Venezuelan media since the 1990s that refers to government officials there who have been corrupted by drug money. It's like arresting Stephen Miller and indicting him for being a kingpin in the murderous, bloodthirsty gang called, quote, the Trump administration. I mean, we get the point, but it's still bullshit. They, in fact, had to rewrite one of the prior indictments of Maduro to eliminate this part about the cartel, so that's another reason the case could get tossed. By law, our law, Judge Hellerstein could dismiss the charges against Maduro. Now, as to what comes after this, well, yes, Greenland comes after this, but I meant relative to Trump and Venezuela. Brian Beutler writes, he is almost there, but not quite. I'm with him. The candidates for the Democratic nomination in 2028 should be declaring lots of things. I will level the Trump ballroom and rebuild the East Wing. I will take Trump's name off every government building and the Kennedy Center. I will prosecute his family and the members of his administration. I will expunge the fictitious Orwellian rewriting of the history of January 6th on the White House website, etc. But Beutler wants them, maybe, to go a step farther. Quoting him, the next Democratic president should be willing in his or her heart to honor extradition requests for Trump from countries where he's unilaterally violated the domestic law, such as, for instance, Venezuela. Yes, please. In fact, by then it may be necessary to hold something like the NBA draft lottery for the Trump extradition rights. Let's see, Venezuela has a 14% chance, Canada 12.5%, Greenland 10.5%, Mexico 9%, and oddly enough in our draft lottery here for the Trump extradition rights, the New York Jets have a chance of 4%. Also of interest here, Trump is still nuts, and there's more evidence that he's getting nuttier. And the Tony DeCopel story means the Katie Tur story. And I swear somebody posted on Threads, what does Tony DeCopel's cringy CBS rollout and bow to MAGA tell us about Katie Tur and MS Now? And somebody replied to that, what Keith Olbermann has been saying for years. Well, it may be even worse than you know. What may have been behind his hiring and what may have been behind their marriage. That's next. This is an all-new edition of Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead, the Tony DeCopel story, which is, as you may suspect, also the Katie Tur story, which is also, as you may have suspected, necessarily becomes the me story. But first, postscripts to the news, some headlines, some updates, some snark. This is the Countdown Podcast, and these are the places where there's news. Dateline, an asylum. No, not political asylum. The other kind of asylum. To Trump's insanity again, and if you had any doubts he's crazy since he seized power again, he's talked to Joe Scarborough 6 times, and no sane man on earth would do that more than once. Trump's own continuing fight against mental health is almost always on display, and the more we see of it, the more I am convinced that Anosognosia, which I have been pushing down your throat as a component to this since the year 2017. Anosognosia, yeah, I got that one right. It's involved. He is psychologically or neurologically totally unwell. They test him for it. They may even be treating him for it. They give him test after test after test that even most impaired people would eventually recognize is a screening test for dementia. Yet Trump remains utterly and I think sincerely convinced that they are testing him in order to give him updates on how much higher his IQ is than it was last time. He really thinks that. The part of his brain that should tell him he has a disease is broken. It has a disease. It won't tell him he has a disease. It won't let him remember anybody else telling him he has a disease. It will invent an alternate explanation for anything about the disease that it cannot forget or wish away. Like the tests. And Tuesday, he was still talking about the test. The third one, fourth one, 38th one, we don't know because he's clearly lost count. And in what may go down in history as one of the maddest moments of his madness at the Republican congressional retreat. Rarely, even for Trump, has there been so much insanity on so many topics in so short a time. Just go and look at Getty Images for the still photos of him. He looks like a guy making faces at a monkey at a zoo. We'll start with those goddamned exams for dementia that he thinks are, I don't know, screening tests for Nobel Prize eligibility. Then move on to reminding everybody we can impeach and remove him next year if there is a blue wave in the midterms, which he was nice enough to mention. Then hinting at canceling the midterms and still leaving the door open to, Maduroing the presidency and illegally retaining power as dictator. Fasten your seatbelts.
We should give everybody, like, these competency tests, right? The cognitive, they call it cognitive. I'm the only president that went for cognitive. I think every president and vice president should be forced to take cognitive exams, mental tests, like, are they intelligent? Wouldn't it be nice? But you got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached. We don't impeach them. You know why? Because they're meaner than we are. We should have impeached Joe Biden for 100 different things. We have to even run against these people. Now, I won't say cancel the election. They should cancel the election because the fake news will say, he wants the elections canceled. He's a dictator. They always call me a dictator. Nobody's worse than Obama and the people that surrounded Biden. Not Biden. I don't think it was Biden. He didn't know what the hell was going on, okay? The election was rigged. He had no idea what happened. He still doesn't. I could have the most unbelievable 4 years, and I guess I'm not allowed to run. I'm not sure. Is there a little something out there that I'm not allowed to run? But let's assume I was allowed to run. I could have, there's going to be a constitutional movement.
Constitutional movement. You'll notice he doesn't say amendment. This is presumably that fascist group retrofitting of the 22nd Amendment, which says 2 terms, that's it. And they're trying to twist it and have been for years into that it really means 2 consecutive terms so that you could serve 11 terms as president, provided that only 2 of them are consecutive. So Trump could run again in 2028 because he hasn't served 2 consecutive terms, but Obama and Clinton could not, or Bush even for that matter. I think that's what it means. I don't know. Regardless, this is a man who is gradually working towards the kind of career climax that Hitler had, or Mussolini, or if he's lucky, Castro or Mao. And he thinks, again, anosognosia, he thinks there is a groundswell of support for him for a 3rd term. Not just that he's going to seize power. Anybody can seize power, but you really have to be specially nuts to convince yourself that everybody wants you to seize power when your approval ratings are in the low 30s. It is fitting And it provides a neat callback to something earlier in the show. If I close on this particular issue of Trump's actual popularity versus what he thinks in his delusional head is his popularity, it's from the Cleveland Clinic. Quote, anosognosia. Anosognosia is a condition where your brain can't recognize one or more other health conditions you have. It's extremely common with mental health conditions like schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease. I wonder if they have any tests they could give him for any of that. Number one story on the countdown, and it's just not clear how much longer the CBS Evening News with Tony DeCopel, even the new fascist, dumbed-down, unwatchable, nevermind Fox News, we've gone directly to copying Alex Jones' CBS Evening News with Tony DeCopel, can remain the CBS Evening News with Tony DeCopel. The first edition, in which, when there were technical problems, DeCopel basically froze and complained, which is exactly the first two things you are not supposed to do if you're the anchor, actually showed a slight ratings rise from the season average. But given that a first episode or the first episode of a new anchor is almost always the peak for at least a few years, this program is going to vanish quickly. The second episode, Tuesday, featured a lighthearted feature on our Secretary of State, introduced with DeCopel saying, "Marco Rubio, we salute you." And, of course, this was all preceded by the worst rollout video in the history of television, in which DeCopel trashed the memory of Walter Cronkite, implying the CBS Evening News then wasn't as transparent as the CBS News with Tony DeCopel is. And I'm guessing he spit on Cronkite's grave because the CBS Evening News was never actually anchored by Edward R. Murrow. He wasn't as transparent as I am. You know, transparent can also mean we can see right through you, pal. Anyway, the flaw in the plan is pretty obvious. The show has been reimagined as a really stupid, MAGA-friendly half-hour newscast featuring anchors and reporters MAGA has been brainwashed for 40 years to hate. MAGA won't watch this. Barry Weiss could come on and do a striptease every night. MAGA won't watch this. Any incumbent CBS audience, and they were not just last, they were really last in the ratings, they won't watch it either. And DeCopel doesn't seem to know how to get out of the way of such a terrible game plan. I once did a show for ESPN called ESPN2 Sports Night, which had 18 coordinating producers, and not one of them had the same idea for what the show should be like, and it was dead on arrival, too. And other than a couple of self-deprecating jokes, we, the anchors, Mitch Albom and Susie Kolber and me, we just went out there and did the show. Stu Scott and Bill Pito, a couple of other people involved in the show every night, Deb Kaufman, and we just did the show. And we never claimed it was the greatest thing ever. We just tried to survive it. Tony DeCopel does not seem to be trying to survive this. Were this the old CBS, the shelf life on Tony would be exactly until Thursday, February 5th. In 1986 in Los Angeles, when I was working at another station in L.A., KTLA, KCBS, the CBS newscast in the second largest market in the country, introduced a revolutionary news format that it was supposed to be a template for every newscast on every CBS station in the country. Or, on September 15th, KCBS replaced its regular old local news thing. Here's the 4 o'clock news with this couple. Then the 5 o'clock news with this couple. Then the 6 o'clock news with this couple. With the news wheel. The news wheel. It was a series of 20-minute segments over 2.5 hours, anchored generally by one news person, although I think they did 20 minutes of hard news at the top of the hour at 4 and 5. Anyway, these were all sort of wacky segments. One was 20 minutes remote with the weatherman called California Living. I think there was a Hollywood-only segment, 20 minutes, all showbiz stuff. There was also, the news wheel also had an actual wheel. There was an actual news wheel. The set had been redesigned at great cost to be turned into a Lazy Susan with a motor and desks on it. Many desks, many sets. The first 20 minutes would end. The newscasters would get the hell off the news wheel. The business guy or whoever would go on to the news wheel, and then the thing would move. They'd throw a switch and the thing would rotate, like Hank's Look-Around Cafe in the Larry Sanders Show. And it would reveal another set, while the first 4 to 4:20 newscast set disappeared in the background. Then at 4:40, it would rotate again, and God help you if you didn't get off the wheel fast enough. This didn't go over well. People still watched and cared about local news in 1986, and there was only, I'd say 6 articles a day in the Los Angeles Times for the following 4 weeks. The news director, a future friend of mine named Eric Sorensen, resigned, I think, on day 28. The general manager of the station was fired the next Monday. The news wheel was scrapped 2 days later, 1 month and 1 day after it had been launched. We tried to reinvent the wheel. In fact, they got rid of it on a Wednesday. Didn't even wait till the start of the week. Gone bye Felicia. They didn't even change the set. They just switched off the motor. When I went to work at KCBS 2 years ago, and by the way, news director Sorensen had been rehired in the interim, and he gave me 7 times what I was making at KTLA, so I'll always defend the news wheel. The old news wheel was still there 2 years later, and I asked if the old weatherman from California Living was, actually fired the way they told the story, or if he was just stuck in the back part that we couldn't really see anymore. How do you feed him back there? So, in the old days at CBS, the CBS Evening News with Tony DeCopel would have lasted until February 5th. Who knows about now? They may like this. I've never met Tony DeCopel, but I am assured he hates me. I take this assurance from his then-girlfriend, now wife, Katie Turr, who told me this repeatedly while we were still talking. Michael Signorelli, who really did post on Threads asking what DeCopel's willingness to collaborate with the MAGA thing says about Katie Turr on MS Now, and somebody answered, quote, what Keith Olbermann has been saying for years. To which I replied, Gabby Olbermann is right. And then somebody else said, I had awful taste in women. And I replied, you bet I do. Back to the point. There are 2 things I think you may not know about Tony DeCopel. One is he has 2 children who live in Israel, which is not only fine, it's also, who cares? You can have kids of 17 different faiths in 17 different countries. What's the difference? Provided it doesn't impact what goes into your newscast. I mean, the CBS Evening News used to be guest hosted by Charles Kuralt, and I believe Charles Kuralt was the one who had like an extra wife somewhere, a second life. When he would go on vacation or go on the road, it was with a different Mrs. Kuralt than the one who lived at home. I mean, these things don't really matter unless you don't mention it or if it affects the newscast. But if he was handpicked by Barry Weiss, who is obsessed with trying to stamp out even both sidesist coverage of Israel, and you don't work some kind of disclaimer in there just once about, well, he has family in Israel. That's it. If you don't do that, though, why are you not doing that? You're in ethical trouble as it is. Especially given that it was the backlash against DeCopel's harsh interview of Ta-Nehisi Coates that started the process that ended with DeCopel anchoring the CBS Evening News until February 5th. CBS reprimanded him over how he had treated Coates on the Palestine-Israel part of Coates' book. CBS's owner at the time then reprimanded her news people and hinted at anti-Semitism. She then sold CBS to the Ellisons, who hired Barry Weiss, and now, bingo, Tony DeCopel is the anchor. Pro tip, if you want to do something after this other than maybe at Fox News, Tony, quit now. Apologize and quit right now. This is not going to get better. It might, as Mr. Signorelli's post suggests, it might begin to erode Katie's career too. And she's done enough to erode it as it is. Plus, there's the other thing you may not know about. I will never shake my conviction that they are married because of her first book. because she was desperate to get a ghostwriter for it. And I have that from her. They were dating. She and I were still talking, like 8 years after I had asked her to move out of my house. And she said she liked him, but she didn't think he was like long-term material, and he had these other kids, and anyway, on January 22nd, 2017, Katie Turr of MSNBC asked me to write her Trump book for her. She was serious, and there are receipts. I'll get back to the book story. But first, since last spring, when her second book came out, I have read story after story that boiled down to one of the headlines I read that was, Katie Turr's relationship with Keith Olbermann haunted her. Now, the articles have not been overtly negative, except in a passive-aggressive sense, although try out that headline on yourself there and see if you like to be described as haunting someone. But she wrote a book claiming that many experiences, somehow including the time she lived with me, hurt and slowed and limited her career. So all this time I have remained silent about the nearly 3 years she and I lived together, and the 8 years after that during which I remained her good and loyal friend, and I have remained silent even though the day she moved into my place in New York, she expected a New York TV station would hire her with no experience and no audition tape. And I have remained silent about how her father, whom she has never stopped trashing, sent her $10,000 worth of cameras and editing equipment to help her get started. And I have remained silent about how I pushed her to not just sit there staring at all that equipment her dad sent, but to use it to go cover stories so she could at least make a tape. And I have remained silent even though once she didn't like something I told her, and she immediately said she was thinking of calling the New York Post gossip page and telling them terrible things about me. And I have remained silent that after I asked her to move out, I paid her rent at a new apartment for a year so she could keep working and living in New York. And I have remained silent even though I paid off her college loans. And when she complained that every time you Googled her name, you also got my name, I loaned her the money to hire a company that altered her Google results. And I have remained silent even though I introduced her to her first agent and to all the people who hired her at News 12 and WPIX and WNBC and NBC News. And I have remained silent even though when she happened to be assigned to Trump's campaign announcement, and Trump knew who she was, because when we lived together, it was in one of these Trump buildings here, and she got to do the last great actual interview with him, and NBC promptly offered her the chance to be its reporter on his campaign. She called me and said, "No, I'm going back to London. I don't like politics. You know that." I was the one who told her she was nuts. And this wasn't politics. It was dark, terrible history in progress. And she sighed and said, "Fine, okay, send me some books about it." And I have remained silent even though she sent me nearly all of her scripts for her NBC News stories, including her Trump campaign coverage in 2016, and I edited nearly every one of them, and several times I had to completely rewrite them for her. And I have remained silent even though when her father announced he was transitioning, the friend she called up in hysterics was me. And I have remained silent even though she twice lied to reporters and editors at the New York Times and the Washington Post, telling them she had asked me on their behalf to do interviews with them about her. And I have remained silent even though she lied to them that I had declined the interviews. And I have remained silent even though 6 days after my emergency appendectomy in 2007, she started punching and slapping me with real intent to do harm because the living room wasn't clean enough in our place. And how exactly do you even try to defend yourself against a woman 125 pounds lighter and a foot shorter than you? So yesterday I'm reading stories about her husband getting a vasectomy, and I'm sitting there waiting to see how she managed to make this one my fault. When Katie's first book came out, she reduced our entire history to a throwaway anecdote defending Kellyanne Conway. The story described me as somebody she had dated briefly in her 20s. After the book came out, and frankly and calmly, I don't know for certain who wrote her first book. I mean, people who can't write suddenly can find their muse. It's possible she wrote it, and her other books too. But after the first book came out that dismissed 3 years of our shared life as dating briefly in her 20s, I told her she had been awful to me, and she replied, "I'm sorry, you're right, I'm a terrible person, and it is the last thing we ever discussed." I told her I would not communicate with her again, and I have not, nor have I spoken about her publicly. But I do keep wondering about that book. I still have a text from her from 9:14 p.m. on December 11th, 2016, after she had signed her contract for her book, which became Unbelievable. An ironic title. It reads, "Do you still want to share your Trump doc with me?" Doc here meaning my trove of documents, my hundreds of pages of Trump notes that I had kept for use in my GQ video series. And I joked back, "Sure, how much?" And she joked back, $10, $20. And I emailed it all to her for free that night with only one request: don't leave me out of your acknowledgments in the book. And guess what? She left me out of the acknowledgments in the book, too. More than a month later, at 2:35 p.m. on Sunday, January 22nd, I had just returned home from Los Angeles and doing Bill Maher's show, and Katie Tur texted me about why they had never invited her on. And then she switched topics to ask, quote, "Want to write this book?" I had taken a nap, so it was not until 5:32 that I replied, "What? Well, you're not serious. How would that work?" That's when she phoned. She was about to give the advance money back to the publisher, she said. "I can't write a book. I'm like 50,000 words short, and it's terrible. I'll give you half the money. I'll give you more than half the money." I pointed out to her that I had written or rewritten dozens of her stories for NBC News and MSNBC, and it was not a question of money. It was a question of what we could get away with. No viewer, and maybe only one executive in a million, would ever notice that one sentence or one paragraph of script in her 2-minute report was actually written by me. First of all, she was the one saying it. Each time I wrote or rewrote in her name for NBC, it was a fireable offense for her, but one that nobody would ever think to look for, even though there is necessarily an email trail 10 miles long. But writing a book for her about Trump? In my writing style? Not read aloud by her, but in print? I have a pretty distinct writing style, which I don't think I could ever sufficiently hide for more than about 17 words at a stretch. Somebody would notice. Her publisher might cancel it or even sue, or if it got published, NBC might notice it and fire her. It was not just a bad idea for her and very dubious ethically, but it stood an excellent chance of destroying her career and damaging mine, maybe. She said, "Okay, you're right." And she told me she was going to talk it over with her boyfriend, Tony, from CBS that night, and her thought was to give back the advance and cancel the book. And I said, "Ghostwriter, maybe?" And she said, "Like who?" And I said, "I had no idea." I tried to joke her out of these grim prospects by reminding her that at least for the several $1,000s worth of research I gave her, I had cut the price to no dollars and no cents. And anyway, the next thing I knew, the book was published. There isn't a paragraph of it that reads like the rest of her writing, and I get reduced in it from the guy she lived with for 3 years who started her career to somebody she dated briefly in her 20s and the dark half of an anecdote defending Kellyanne freaking con job. I will say, I think the things I glossed over before about the New York Times and Washington Post were genuinely deplorable. The thing about the Post first. A Washington Post reporter I'd known for more than a decade named Paul Farhi called me up and asked me to do an interview with him about Katie, and I had my doubts. As I said to Paul, this is at least a little sexist. When I broke through at MSNBC in 1998, nobody called up one of my ex-girlfriends, even the ones in the business, to ask one of them about me. This was an unfair gradient for her or any woman that the first thing a reporter or just somebody Googling her brought up or found was her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, especially me. It is utter misogyny, in fact. On the other hand, there could be a calculation in which it is useful to Katie if I do the interview and amplify the publicity. It is also one of the things I had warned her about literally the day we started dating. And in fact, I reminded her of it the night of the first real date at an Al Gore book event at the Museum of Natural History in New York in the Whale Room. Sure enough, I went from the whale room to the men's room for a moment while I was out. An online gossip clown who had been following us around went over and pretended he knew her or something, and when I got back, she was bubbling over, telling me she'd met a friend of a friend and told him all about us, and I asked if she had remembered my warning, and she obviously had not, and, quote, Katie Turr, new girlfriend of Keith Olbermann, was online before we got home. So when she found there was a way to scrub your Google searches, so every time somebody plugged in her name, they would not also get Keith Olbermann's girlfriend or Keith Olbermann's ex-girlfriend, as I said, I helped her pay to use that service. I get it. The sexism prevails. Maybe it'll go away someday. Maybe it won't. So anyway, when Farhi of the Post called me up, I called Katie. She said she thought it was sexist. And anyway, she wasn't participating with the Post's story on her, and it would really help if I did not do so either. So I declined the interview. And a week later, there in the Washington Post was a big feature on Katie Turr. Because guess what? She did participate with it after all. Complete interview. And worse yet, she told Farhi that she had encouraged me to do the interview with him, so he put it in the paper that I declined to be interviewed, so I looked like an idiot. And another thing, I'm not mad. Please don't put in the newspaper that I got mad. I called her up and I yelled at her, and she apologized, and she promised she would not do anything like that ever again. And she promptly did something even worse. A month or two later, the New York Times article comes out. It is a huge profile of her, I think in the magazine or a weekend edition, and in it, Mr. Olbermann refused to be interviewed for this story. This is a complete surprise to me. I didn't even recognize the writer's name. I found her contact info, and I reached out to her and said, have we ever spoken? And she says, no. And I say, emails, texts? And she says, no. And then I say, then when did I refuse to be interviewed for your Katie Turr article for the New York Times? And she says, oh, I asked Katie Turr to ask you. And Katie Turr asked you, and you told Katie Turr you refused to be interviewed. And I said, none of that happened. And there is a long silence on the end of the phone. And then the writer says, let me call the editor to take that part out. And the Times changed the online version of why I didn't do the interview, although they do not note that they changed it. And I later got a note from a Times editor apologizing. She just lied to this reporter from the Times. Just lied. Oh, I'll call him and ask. Oh, he told me he doesn't want to talk to you about me. Just lied, and I just sat there. And I know, very unlike me, I have to say. I was actually too angry to do anything. Anyway, as I mentioned, Katie Turr published another book this year, and a lot of the publicity was about how I haunted her, and she had to go to great lengths to separate her career from mine, even as she keeps mentioning me, and even though she asked me in dead seriousness to write the first book for her. The book, the second one, is mostly about all the impediments and roadblocks she has faced, while, forging her career. But I will add this last point and then drop the subject, I hope, forever. For 43 years full-time, I have done this. And counting college, it's, God help me, 47 years. And throughout that stretch, I have tried to acknowledge anybody and everybody who helped me in my career, even the ones I don't like, even people who are totally, utterly politically opposed to me. I still think fondly of Stuart Varney from Fox News because he taught me, when I was right up against it one night, how to use a teleprompter. I'll always cherish the memory of working with Stuart Varney. He was such a help to me. Politically, we could have a duel. But of course, as I said, the dynamic is different. I'm a guy. Still, her book is about people who hindered her, and almost none of it is about people who helped her. She is rapidly turning into a kind of professional martyrdom. I saw this in its earliest stages 16 years ago, and she is now going from making it martyrdom into a brand. And I'll say this lastly and sincerely. If your story of your career is all about people you think held you back, and not even mostly about the people who bent over backwards to help you along, that is all just very, very Sad. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Most of our countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray on the guitars, bass, and drums, and John Philip Chanel handling orchestration and keyboards. They are our musical directors of Countdown. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust, who also today served as my announcer. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. This program was produced by Ted. Everything else was, as always, my fault. The countdown for today, day 354 of America held hostage again. Just 1,109 days until the scheduled end of his lame duck and lame-brained term, unless he is removed sooner by MAGA or Jeffrey Epstein, affordability, marble armrests, Venezuela, ICE shooting innocent civilians. Could be anything. The next scheduled countdown is Monday, bulletins as the news merits. Already 2 of them this week. Until the next edition, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.